All right. Today we're beginning a lesson, kind of winding up Luke here, and I just want to ask you a question. How many of you ever had a aha moment? Aha. Nobody?
Is that an H-A or H-O-W?
I spell A-H-A.
Oh, it's aha.
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 Okay.
Aha.
You know, like, something coming together and making sense.
Yeah.
You want to share?
Well, I could tell a funny one, but I'm not going to tell that one.
Oh.
Let me think for just a minute. I need more time to think on this.
Okay. All right.
Because the one I thought of immediately is too funny and I can't tell. It's something I did really dumb.
Well, that's okay.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Sure.
We're among friends.
Okay. I went to Kroger, and as I was in the parking lot, had my mask on, getting ready to walk in, and this senior gentleman and his wife walked up to me and said, "Oh, we've been waiting to see you." And I'm thinking, who are you? I did not know them, and I'm thinking, they're getting ready to rob me. Well, anyway, he said, "Will you do me a favor? I've been waiting to give you something for a long time." I said, "You have?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You like Hank Williams, don't you?" I said, "Oh, I was raised up with Hank Williams." He said, "Well, I've got a cassette tape I've been waiting to give you." And I said, "You have?" He said, "Yeah." So he said, "Will you walk back with me to my car?" My husband said I did the dumbest thing I ever should have not done, but I'm like this. That was an aha moment, and I walked back because I thought, well, bless his heart, he's trying to do a good Samaritan deed for me. That's what I was thinking. So I walked back to his car, and his wife hugged me. She says, "We've been waiting to see you because we want you to have this Hank Williams cassette tape." And I said, "Oh, aha, thank you so much." And that happened about, during this whatever, and I still have that cassette tape. If anybody wants a Hank Williams cassette tape, I got an aha moment.
Okay. Yeah, I had an aha moment when I first learned to ride a bike. You know, how many times you fell over and all of a sudden it's like, I'm balanced, and physically. And just, I was like, wow. Anybody else? In math class, did you ever get that all of a sudden understood what the teachers trying to present? That aha, I get it. No? Who said that? Or you read a book or a story and you kind of come together, all the mystery comes together and you say, aha, that's the one. Did you ever have that? Sort of.
No, I usually do that with jokes. Jokes become really dumb with jokes. And when people tell me a joke, I'm like, stand there for a few minutes and I'm like, oh, I got it.
It's a time joke. You laugh when you had time. That's right. But we all have those aha moments, that kind of grab us, and it just all of a sudden hits, and it may be in the middle of something, like, oh, it can be in the middle of like 2 hours later. It's like, oh, I get it now. Aha. Okay. But these moments are usually kind of rare, but they can be very satisfying, can't they? I mean, that kind of everything comes together and you just grab onto it and think, now I see what you were trying to tell me or whatever. Our lesson today deals with the ultimate aha moment. As we near the end of the study of Luke, we are now looking at the post-resurrection time. We have read and studied these events many times in our time in church. We read about them, and sometimes, let's try to see if we can get something new out of this today. In the first 12 verses of Luke 24, we read where the women, and we think these women were Mary, Joanna, Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James, and some others. What were they going to do? They were going to continue to do what? Prepare the body, which was very customary. It was customary to do that. They had their spices in hand, they ran, they approached the tomb, and what did they discover? The stone was rolled away, and what else? As they looked in, it was empty. But they did, it wasn't really empty. What else? What are they seeing there?
The grave cone.
Yeah. And two dazzling men in white, or two persons in white, in their dazzling clothes. And what did they tell him, or them? They said, he's what? He's risen. He's not here. He's what? He's risen. And they told, and after this explanation, they remembered the words that Jesus said. The Lord telling them that gosh, I can't read my brain today. That His word, they remembered His words. It pierced them what they said, what they said to them. And these women then took that knowledge and they did what? They kept it to themselves, right? What did they do? It's hard. Yeah, they ran and told others, didn't they? They told them what they saw at the tomb, what they heard, and then again, when they told it to the people in the crowd, the crowd they told to, they were kind of, the people that listened were kind of like, what are you talking about? But what did Peter do? He ran. He ran to investigate. He looked in, and he was amazed to find what they said. Nothing was there. Now let's go on to so that's important to remember. The women told, Peter ran back and saw what was going on, or what was going on. Now we flash forward, it was the same day actually, and we're on the road to Emmaus. I hope I said that right. This is the same day. Two men were walking, discussing the events of the past 2 days. And this walk was only about 7 miles, but it was a very hard walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus. Very rough terrain, dusty, dry, not pleasant, not a lot of trees or shade. But it was a rough one. And more than likely they got their 10,000 steps in for the day, don't you think? I'm sure. Yeah. They probably got a count around, So they had good exercise. As they were walking, we know that one man was Cleopas. And we think he was the husband of one of the women who was at the cross, who witnessed what was going on. And the other one, we don't know who his name was, but it doesn't really matter. The discussion is heavy at times, and at times it could have been very argumentative. Another joint, but then someone else comes up to the group. And we know that guy was who? Jesus, but did they know him? No. And he joins in, and he listens to the conversation. And, he questions the man and even asks about this dispute. And they are kind of like, don't you know what's happened? I mean, haven't you heard? He act like he didn't know anything about it. And that made him very discouraged. So let's begin any questions or comments about this? Well, let's look at our first lessons here. I would like for somebody to read Luke 24, 18 through 24. Okay. Yes.
And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only one visiting? Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we are hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What is more, it is the 3rd day since this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us what they had seen, a vision of an angel who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus."
Thanks. So here we have the guy trying to relay these events to someone who didn't know what had happened. And they could, as they were talking, can you imagine what they were feeling at this point, these two guys before Jesus approached? Could they have been confused as to what was going on the past couple of days? Confused? Could they have been angry? Yeah. How about despair, hopelessness? There were a lot of emotions were going on through at this time, I'm sure. A lot of people, a lot of his followers were just wondering, well, what? Now what? And Jesus, he died on that cross, and now here it is the third day, and this tomb is reported empty. But they didn't see him. So I'm sure they were kind of like wondering, well, what exactly is happening here? Anybody want to share anything or what they might see?
Well, all these people's hope was that Jesus would deliver Israel, and not in a spiritual way. They were hoping that Jesus would be the king and be able to deliver Israel underneath the Roman heel.
Yeah.
But that's not what his mission was. So as we see in these verses here, Jesus had explained to them that he is their Savior. But it's in a different time and a different spiritual way at this time. It says that he who was going to redeem Israel. They said he was going to redeem Israel. In other words, they thought Israel would be delivered.
Yeah.
They didn't understand he has already redeemed Israel through his death on the cross. So I think that's where a lot of the Jewish people got confused.
Yeah, they just...
A lot of them there were hoping that Jesus was, not that they believed he was the Son of God, but I think they believed that he was the deliverer of the Jewish state at that time.
Yeah.
And he was, but not the way they thought
Yeah,
he should have been.
they were thinking here, he was thinking here, they were not, it wasn't meeting right now. Cleopas tries to relate all these events to him as quickly as he can, or as, I guess maybe as simple as he can, saying, since you don't really know what happened. In the Amen Acts, Cleopas acts like, well, how could you not even heard about this stuff? I mean, this was big news. I mean, it dominated the area. And, I'm sure everybody was still, their tongues were still wagging about what was going on during this time, what had happened. But Jesus, remember what Jesus is sometimes called the great teacher? Well, like a teacher, he says, he kind of gets them to talk. He says, well, what things? He kind of gets them to, kind of stimulates their thought. And just like a teacher, he probably wants to know, well, where are you all coming from? Let me know what you're thinking right now. And give me your ideas. And so that's a good teacher. He kind of picks up on what's going on. And let me see exactly how much you know, and let's go on from there. So, like I said, Cleopas does begin, and he identifies Jesus as Nazareth. He calls him what else? He calls him a what? A powerful prophet. And he's like no other teacher. Who has Mark 1:22?
And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, not as the scribes.
Yeah. He really taught with authority. We've all had, we've had teachers who have just really commanded the room. And you just knew when you were in their presence that they really knew what they were talking about. And we've had teachers who were like, whatever. But, we all have those moments where you just come in, and maybe as a teenager you don't really realize how good they were, but you just come into the room and there's a different atmosphere. It just, wow. And then he talks about the recent events. He talks about that Jesus was crucified. At the hands of whom? He even says it's the who that did it. It's our leaders, but they did it. And it says what they were expecting. Just like Mike said, they were expecting the redemption of Israel. That they were going to be free from the Romans' cruelty. The Romans were very cruel people, and I think from what I've read, this was one of the worst places where a Roman soldier could be placed. Was like, well, if you're going to Jerusalem, it's not exactly the Riviera. It's going to be rough. Yeah, it's going to be rough. Well, they wanted freedom from captivity. They wanted a restoration of the kingdom of David. And in Acts 1:6, we get a glimpse of what even the disciples wondered. Acts 1:6? Okay.
When they therefore were come together, they asked him, saying, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore the kingdom of Israel?
So they had some expectations. But the simple conversation between these three revealed something else. There was a misunderstanding of who the Messiah was and what he's going to do. In their eyes, Jesus was the problem. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, right? I mean, they were saying, get out of Roman rule, let us have the kingdom of David back, let's get all back to where it was. But did Jesus do that? Not what they wanted. He didn't restore. That's what they wanted to be free again. They wanted to be released from all this burden of taxations and rules and regulations that were just encumbering them. But he died at the hands of the Romans, the enemy, and the soldiers and the leaders of that era. In their eyes, he was not the Messiah that they were expecting. And then there was the rising on the third day, and here it is the third day, and what? These men, along with many others, represent the thoughts of what many were wondering at that time. What's going to happen now? This was not, here we had all this excitement for about 3 years that he was here, and we thought, this is it. And now he was on the cross, he had died on the cross, reports of the tomb being empty. Kind of like, would there be a lot of discouragement? But did Jesus come out and say, here I am? He didn't, not yet. It was not the time. It was not the aha moment yet. So Cleopas continues with the report of the empty tomb and the angels saying he was alive. And as the old saying goes, news was traveling. The women rushed back to tell the others what had happened. They needed proof. And what do you think these men and women were thinking at this point?
Well, they stated at the end of verse 24, but him they did not see.
Yeah.
In other words, there was still no proof as far as they were concerned about the resurrected Christ.
Yeah.
Why else would they go home? If they really thought there was a resurrected Christ, a lot of these people wouldn't have went home. They'd have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
But their statement there that him they did not see tells me that as far as the disciples were concerned, there was no decisive proof to them. Since nobody saw him, that Jesus was alive or that he was resurrected.
Yeah, there's an empty tomb. And then they said, well, some people said,
And see,
Then I could have took it.
yeah,
Thomas wasn't the only one who doubted.
yeah,
There was a lot of people doubted. They left and went, a lot of them left and went home. They thought, well, it's over,
that's
done.
over, yeah. 3 years and it was, but there was a void there. There was something, wait, and Sherry? Oh yeah, you said, and some people could have said, well, they took his body, just to kind of maybe make even a little bit more confusion from there. Anybody else want to share anything? So they continue on their little walk for 7 miles, talking, chatting. Who wants to read 25 through 27?
He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself.
And there he is. He's talking. He kind of tells it all. So Cleopas had done some of the sharing at this point. Now it's time that a stranger comes in and starts sharing. And boy, did he share. I don't know how long it took, but I'm sure it took a long time to go from Moses, was it, all the way to the present day. He calls them what? He calls them foolish. He does not mean that they're silly or intelligent or not intelligent. He is just referring to them as not understanding the obvious. Here it is. The events which have occurred and have been predicted by prophets of old. And if you ever go, in other words, wake up and remember your teachings, things that you have learned, things that you were taught as young kids and have learned all throughout your life. And what has occurred, it was supposed to. All this was planned, right? It was God's plan. And the Messiah was going to do what? When he came, he was going to suffer and then enter into his glory. I read a book one time, it's called The Road to Emmaus. It's by a man named David Linvall. And he talks about how the Old Testament is just one thing after another about leading to the birth of Christ. And it just goes through various, and from Genesis all the way to, is it Malachi, the last book? Talks about all the things, all the scripture there that just points to Jesus. And then I never, it's one of those, like, you just never think about that until you really get into it. And it's a very interesting book if you ever have a chance. It's one of those books you have to read a while and kind of put it aside because it's kind of, you got to kind of marinate all that stuff before you go on because it's really interesting. But, we would read a lot about what happened in the Old Testament. There's a lot of scripture references in this lesson about the Old Testament, things referring to Jesus. Like, for example, Isaiah 7:14. Does anybody have that?
Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmaus.
Yeah. And if you go on to, of course you can't read the whole chapter, but in chapter Isaiah 53, part of 52 and going into 53, again there's the talking of the written word about who Jesus is, about the Messiah. In Deuteronomy 18 through 15 through 19, there's another portion there that talks about Christ. Deuteronomy, now think about that, that's way in the beginning of the Bible, but still talking about it, talking about the birth. Zechariah writes of Jesus entering on a donkey and being pierced for the transgression of others. Zechariah 9:9.
Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey.
Yeah. And then in 12:10, talks about the piercing.
And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son.
Again, and he went from Genesis all the way to the end to Malachi. And these words of the prophets were all written hundreds of years before Christ was born. Hundreds of years. And this, he proves that the one that was spoken of in the Old Testament is the one that was on the cross, that came here. But at this time, does Jesus say, here I am? Does he say who he is at this point? Is it not the right time? Jesus knows. And it's the right time. The aha moment is not yet. So all this talking amazed them that he was able to articulate so well to them the events from Genesis all the way to Malachi and relay all that to them. And I'm sure they were impressed at what he had told them. But Jesus knew what time it was. And let's look at the last 3 verses, 28 through 31. Okay.
They came near the village where they were going, and he gave the impression that he was going further. But they urged him, stay with us, because it's almost evening, and now the day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. It was as he reclined at the table with them that he took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight.
Okay, so they've been listening to the stranger. I'm sure they were very, just all ears, as they say. And they felt a bond maybe developing between the stranger and these two guys, Cleopas. And they probably thought, well, he's a pretty smart guy. Sounds well educated, articulate, nice to be with. Yeah, so what do? They invite him home. He seems kind of safe. Right, Miss Carver? He's safe, right?
Very safe. Thank you, Garry, for the reminder.
Yeah. I'll never forget that. They urged him to stay. It was hospitality. They were being hospitable to this man, this stranger. It was getting dark. It appeared that Jesus was going to walk on, but they said, "Oh, no, come on, stay with us. We'll break bread together. I'll give you, and they, offer to wash and, clean up and so on and so forth." They were very hospitable. They were doing the best they could do. They were showing they were very thankful that they were able to meet this guy, and probably he brought a lot of comfort, don't you think? At this time, that he comforted them at this time. And then comes the aha moment. Because when he blessed the bread, what happened?
Their eyes were open.
They were open. They knew that the man they were walking with, they knew the man that had spoken so eloquently of the past. It was not just an ordinary, well-educated, articulate man. It was who? It was Jesus. Timing was perfect, wasn't it? He had to get them alone in a room where they could just be very quiet, relaxed, and he told them. He just showed how I'm sure it was a very life-changing moment at that time, and I'm sure that what they had experienced throughout their last couple of days was very life-changing. The confusion, the pictures in their minds of what had happened, and here is Jesus before them. And, I'm sure their emotions were running like, wow, and just by the time they realized who it was, Jesus, what? He disappeared. He just goes away. It wasn't meant for him to stay there that long. But I'm sure, do you think they kept it to themselves? Probably not. Could you keep that to yourself? No. That aha moment had to be shared with others. And our lesson does stop here, but I'd like for us to go on to Luke 24:32 through 36. And I think Aaron has that.
They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while they walked with us on the road up in the spiritual cliff?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told them what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you."
So they said that their hearts were what? I think it said pierced. One verse says pierced. They said, didn't you feel something strange as he was talking? Didn't it sound kind of, and they probably didn't want to share it. But didn't you think, and then as they were talking and sharing, who comes into their midst? Does it say Jesus appears in verse 36? And wrapped up. So anybody else want to share anything? Or?
Well, I think one thing that if you look at the first part of the lesson, how did they describe Jesus as a what? They described him as a prophet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great deed, mighty before God. But how does Jesus describe himself as he talks to them? See, they thought of him just as a great prophet.
Yeah.
But Jesus says, "Ought not to Christ." He used the word Christ, Messiah. He's identifying himself as the Messiah. Where they thought he was just a great prophet. Remember when they first started talking about who Jesus was? That's why he had to reveal to them through the scriptures.
Yeah.
They were confused because nobody wants a great king who suffers. That was a confusing point
In front of everybody. Right?
to all those who followed Jesus, was that he had to suffer and die. They couldn't understand that.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a suffering Messiah.
But Jesus is called.
That's why the scripture is showing that they talked about a suffering servant like that. So I think that's how, when their eyes were open, when you start talking about the Christ,
Yeah.
not just the prophet,
Not just the
Christ.
words. Yeah. And then they're all kind of tied together. Anybody else? Jenny? Well, if not, we can have it closed.